My reflection in the fitting room mirror looked unfamiliar. At 67, I'd long since gotten used to figure-enhancing outfits. For decades, I had chosen practical pants and loose blouses, clothes that were comfortable for work, not for showing off. But today, I stood in front of the mirror in a dark blue dress with a dainty brooch that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months. "It suits you very well, Mrs. Thorndyke," the store assistant smiled, adjusting the folds in the dress. "The color sets off your eyes beautifully." I nodded, not used to compliments. Today, though, I wanted to believe in them. After all, I was preparing for the wedding of my only son. Lion would be marrying his Pauline in 2 weeks, and despite our complicated relationship, I wanted to look dignified. "I'll take it," I said, heading back to the stall to change. While the counselor processed the purchase, I stared out the window at the busy Wilmington street. How strange that in all my long life I'd never left this town. I opened my first laundromat here, buried my husband here, raised my son here, and now Lion's getting married, the last major event in my life worth staying in Wilmington for. After paying with my card, I walked out of the store with a bag in my hands. My old Toyota was waiting in the parking lot. As I got behind the wheel, I glanced at my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had an appointment with the wedding agency at 3. The Pearl Weddings office was located in one of the new business centers on the outskirts of the city. A spacious room with white walls and lots of pictures of happy couples on them. A sweet girl named Carrie led me into the meeting room. "Hey, Mrs. Thorndyke, we've prepared all the paperwork you requested," she said as she laid out the folders on the table. "Are you sure you want to keep your participation confidential?" I nodded. It had been a prerequisite from the start. "Yes, Lion and Paulina can't know that I'm paying most of the expenses. They think the bride's parents are covering everything." Carrie looked puzzled. This probably didn't happen very often in her practice. Usually parents compete for bragging rights over their generosity, not hiding it. "It's just that my son and I complicated relationship," I explained, though I didn't have to explain. "He wouldn't accept money directly from me. He thinks it would undermine his authority in front of his fiancée." I didn't tell the whole story. About how, after my husband died 16 years ago, I'd raised a business and raised my son alone. How Lion had begun to feel ashamed of his background when he went to college. How over the years he grew more and more distant, thinking I was too simple, not educated enough for his new social circle. And when I sold the laundry chain 5 years ago for a decent sum, his interest in me was suddenly rekindled, but only in my money, not in me. "Everything will be confidential as we agreed," Carrie assured me. "Here's the paperwork for the banquet, rent, photographer, decorations, and musicians." I scrutinized each sheet. It was a lot of money, more than $80,000. But I could afford it. Lion was my only child, and despite our differences, I wanted his wedding to be beautiful. "You do realize that if you cancel less than a week before the event, we won't be able to give you a full refund, right?" Carrie asked, handing me a pen. "I understand." I signed the last document. "But no one is going to cancel the wedding." That day, I had no idea how ironic those words would be later. 2 weeks flew by. In all that time, Lion had never called me, never asked if I was going to the wedding. I hadn't received an official invitation either, but I was sure it was just a misunderstanding. After all, who doesn't invite their own mother to a wedding? The morning of the wedding day was sunny. I got up early, took a long shower, styled my still thick, though completely gray hair. I put on the dress I had bought and applied light makeup. I put the honeymoon gift, a check for a substantial sum, in an elegant envelope. The Belvedere Hotel, where the ceremony was held, was the most luxurious in Wilmington. I parked in the parking lot among the expensive cars, and for a moment I felt uncertain. Maybe I should have called a cab instead of arriving in my old car. No, that was silly. I'd always been a practical woman, and I wasn't about to change for the sake of other people's opinions. The hotel lobby was crowded. Guests in smart suits and dresses stood in groups, talking and laughing. I looked around, trying to find familiar faces. Most of those present were unfamiliar to me, apparently friends and relatives of Paulina's. Over the years, Lion had hardly introduced me to his entourage. "Grandmother!" Suddenly, I heard a joyful cry and turned around. Eloise, my 22-year-old granddaughter from Leon's marriage to his first wife, was running toward me. Tall, slender, with my blue eyes and dark hair like her father's. Eloise was the only one who truly kept in touch with me. "You came!" She hugged me. "I'm so glad. I was afraid you'd decide not to come because of—" She didn't finish her sentence, but I knew what she meant, because of my strained relationship with Lion. "How could I miss my own son's wedding?" I smiled. "You look beautiful, darling." Eloise was wearing a soft blue bridesmaid's dress. She fixed her hair and looked around. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the others," she offered. But at that moment, Lion came up to us. My son looked tense, despite the day's festivities. At 42, he was still an attractive man, tall, trim, with a neatly trimmed beard that was already showing gray. His eyes, an exact copy of his late father's, looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. "Mom?" He said it like he couldn't believe his eyes. "What are you doing here?" I was confused. This was not the greeting I was expecting. "I came to your wedding, of course." Lion looked around nervously, then took me under the elbow and led me away from the other guests. "Listen," he began in a quiet but firm voice. "I thought we'd talked about this. You're not on the guest list." I stared at him, not understanding. We hadn't discussed anything. He'd only called me twice in the last month, and both times the conversation had been short and formal. "What are you talking about, Lion? How could I not be invited to my own son's wedding?" He sighed with the look of a man who has to explain obvious things to a child. "Mom, this is an elite event. Paulina's parents are here, their friends, our colleagues." He paused, searching for words. "I don't think you're going to be comfortable here." At that moment, I realized that he didn't just not invite me, he purposely didn't want me here. I, a woman who had spent her life working with her hands, building her business from scratch, was not suited for the elite society of his new family. "You're ashamed of me." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "No, of course not," Lion replied hastily, but his eyes said otherwise. "It's just, Paulina is very anxious to make sure everything goes perfectly. Her parents have invested a lot of money and you don't want your laundry mom to ruin the experience." I finished for him. "Mom, don't start," he sounded annoyed. "I'm just asking you to understand. We can meet after the honeymoon in a small circle." At that moment, Paulina approached us. She looked stunning in her 38 years, slim, with perfect makeup and hair, wearing a dress from a famous designer. Her face expressed polite surprise. "Lion, darling, is everything all right?" she asked, giving me an appraising look. "Yes, everything's fine," he replied. "Mom was just leaving." Paulina gave a fake smile. "Oh, Mrs. Thorndyke, what a shame you couldn't be at the ceremony. Perhaps some other time." She spoke as if my visit was already over, as if I were just a casual acquaintance stopping by to say hello. I looked at Lion, expecting him to intervene, to say something in my defense, but he remained silent, avoiding my gaze. "I'm sorry, but you weren't invited," he finally said quietly. "Please go." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I didn't let them spill. Not here, not in front of them. For years, I'd turned a blind eye to his neglect, made excuses for him, pretended everything was okay. But today, something snapped completely. "Whatever you say," I nodded, keeping my composure. "Congratulations to both of you." I turned to leave, but Eloise caught my arm. "Grandma, please stay." Tears stood in her eyes. "I want you to be here." I gently stroked her cheek. "It's okay, honey. Call me tomorrow." I headed for the exit, feeling the stares of the guests on me. Some were watching our conversation with curiosity. I wondered what they had been told. Did they know that the groom's mother was not invited to her son's own wedding? Walking out of the hotel, I took a deep breath of fresh air. The sun was still shining brightly, but I felt like it had gotten darker around me. I walked to my car on stiff legs and got behind the wheel. For a few minutes, I just sat there staring at myself, trying to comprehend what had happened. Then I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. The time on the screen was 4 hours and 20 minutes past noon. The ceremony was supposed to start in 40 minutes. The banquet was at 7 p.m., all paid for in advance. By me. I looked at the envelope with the gift that was still in my bag. Then I slowly started the car and drove out of the parking lot of the Belvedere Hotel, where my son was celebrating the beginning of a new life without his mother. The drive home seemed endless. I drove on autopilot, hardly noticing traffic lights and other drivers. Scraps of phrases rattled around in my head. You weren't called. Mom's just leaving. Elite event. Each word hit like a slap in the face. 67 years of life, and this is how it ended. I was kicked out of my son's own wedding as an unwanted guest. My street met with its usual calm. Old maple trees along the road, neat middle-class houses. Nothing had changed here in decades. I parked outside my one-story house with a white picket fence, and for a few minutes I just sat in the car, unable to bring myself to get out. It was as if by staying inside, I could delay the moment when I would have to acknowledge the reality of what had happened. Finally, I got out of the car and headed for the porch. The keys trembled in my hand as I opened the door. Crossing the threshold, I kicked off my shoes and walked into the living room. The house where most of my life had been spent seemed foreign and empty today. I looked at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Lion as a child, a smiling boy with a knocked-out front tooth. Lion the teenager with the soccer ball. Lion the college graduate. In all the pictures, he was smiling at me. When did things change? At what point did I become a burden to him, a source of shame? I picked up a picture of my late husband Derek and I standing with little Lion on the beach. Derek was 38 at the time. I was 33. Lion was 8. We looked so happy, so ordinary. A simple middle-class family on vacation. What would you say now, Derek? I whispered, running my finger over my husband's face in the photograph. What would you say to your son? But Derek hadn't been around for 16 years. A sudden heart attack had taken him when Lion was 26. My son still loved me then, still came every weekend, still wasn't ashamed of his origins. I put the photograph back in its place and sank into the chair. Derek and I had started our little business, a laundromat on the corner of Maple and 4th together. He handled the equipment and negotiations. I handled the process organization and bookkeeping. When he was gone, it was all on me at once. But I managed. What's more, over the next 10 years, I expanded the business to a chain of 7 laundromats throughout Wilmington. In my kitchen table drawer, I still had the checks I'd written to Lion over the years. For the down payment on his apartment when he decided to live on his own. For his wedding to Veronica, Eloise's mother. The lawyer's fees when they divorced. Eloise's private school. To pay off his credit cards when he was temporarily in a financial hole. I was always there for him mentally and financially. But with each passing year, Lion grew more and more distant. His new friends, his career at the insurance company, his desire for high society. All of these things gradually created a chasm between us. When I decided to sell the business 5 years ago, Lion suddenly took an unprecedented interest in my life. He came to visit, called, inquired about my health. I wasn't naive and realized that he was primarily concerned with the money from the sale, but I wanted to believe that behind this interest there was a real concern. The amount I received was indeed impressive. $2,300,000, more money than I had ever seen. I bought myself a new car, the same Toyota I drove to the wedding today, remodeled the house, and put the rest into safe investments on the advice of a financial advisor. Lion, upon learning of the amount, came up with a brilliant business plan. He wanted me to invest in some startup of his buddy. I said no, it was too risky. He took offense, called me old-fashioned, unable to see the future. I reminded him that my old-fashionedness had created a successful business. We had a fight. After that, his visits became less frequent, his calls shorter. When he announced his engagement to Paulina 8 months ago, I was overjoyed. I thought maybe this new phase in his life would help us mend our relationship. Naive old woman. The phone in my purse rang, snapping me out of my memories. The bank's number popped up on the screen. A weekly call from my personal manager, the usual procedure for customers with large deposits. Mrs. Thorndyke, good afternoon, I heard Richard's cheerful voice. I'm calling to see if everything is okay with your accounts and investments. I remained silent, staring at the clock on the wall. 5 hours and 15 minutes. The ceremony has already begun. Lion and Paulina are exchanging vows. and in an hour and a half the banquet will begin. A lavish dinner for 120 people, with expensive wines, live music, and dancing until morning, all paid for by me. Mrs. Thorndyke, are you on the phone? Richard asked worriedly. Yes, I'm sorry, I coughed. I have a question, Richard. If I want to cancel the payments that are due in the next few hours, is that possible? Technically, yes, if they haven't been finalized yet. What payments are we talking about? I opened my email and found an email from a wedding agency detailing expenses. Several transactions totaling about $80,000. The Belvedere Hotel, Golden Leaf Catering Company, Jameson's Photography Studio, Rosemary Flower Salon. I read out the list, feeling the determination building inside me with each word. Richard was silent, clearly surprised by this turn of events. These are quite large sums, Mrs. Thorndyke. May I ask the reason? It's to pay for my son's wedding services, but there have been, unforeseen circumstances. I paused. I want to cancel all payments. Immediately. I understand, Richard said carefully. But I must warn you that there may be penalties for canceling and… I'm prepared for any penalties, I interrupted him. Please do whatever you need to do. There was a pause. I could hear Richard typing something on the keyboard. Okay, I see the payments in the system. Most of them are scheduled for tomorrow, so we have time to stop them. But some may have already been partially authorized. I'll contact the back office right away. Thank you, Richard. One more thing. I've been thinking. If I cancel the payments, the money stays in my account. But what would I do with it? It was for Lion, for his happy new start in life, a life in which I had no place. I'd like to open a trust account in the name of my granddaughter, Eloise Thorndyke. I'd like to transfer these funds there. Of course, Mrs. Thorndyke. It can be arranged. We'll need some paperwork, but we can start the process today. We discussed the details, and Richard promised to call back as soon as the payments were stopped. As we wrapped up the conversation, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I had acted decisively, not allowing myself to go along with Lion, not turning a blind eye to his attitude toward me. The next call I made was to the wedding agency. Carrie answered after the third ringtone. Pearl Weddings, how can I help you? Hi, Carrie. This is Leslie Thorndyke. Oh, Mrs. Thorndyke! She sounded surprised. The wedding's already started. Everything's going according to plan. Is there something you wanted to clarify? I'm calling to inform you that I'm canceling all wedding-related payments. There was silence. Then Carrie laughed uncertainly as if she'd heard a bad joke. I'm sorry, what? You're kidding, right? No, Carrie, I just contacted the bank. All transactions will be stopped. But that's impossible. Her voice shook. The ceremony is underway. The guests have gathered. The banquet starts in an hour or so. You can't just… I can, I said firmly. And I'm doing it. There's a force majeure clause in our contract. They're coming. Mrs. Thorndyke, please, let's talk about this. What happened? Maybe we can find a solution. There is a solution, Carrie. The payments have been canceled. But the vendors, the site, it's going to be a scandal. There was panic in her voice. Not my problem. I could almost physically feel Carrie trying to collect her thoughts on the other end of the line. Okay, I have to inform the bride and groom. Go ahead, I replied in a steady voice. Tell them that their sponsor withdrew their funding. But they think the bride's parents paid, Carrie exclaimed. How do I explain? That's not my concern. I paused. You can tell them the truth, though, that the groom's mother, who wasn't invited to the wedding, was paying for their party. Oh my God, Carrie mumbled. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Now you do. Good day, Carrie. I ended the call and put the phone down on the table. My hands were shaking, but not from excitement or fear. It was a strange, almost forgotten sense of freedom. I'd let Lion manipulate me for so many years, taking advantage of my love and money without giving anything in return. I'd waited for gratitude, for respect, for simple human warmth, and I'd gotten nothing. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Eloise's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered it. Grandma? My granddaughter's voice sounded worried. Where are you? Why did you leave? I closed my eyes. Eloise was the only person I really cared about in this situation. Your father asked me to leave, dear. Said I wasn't invited. What? She exclaimed. That can't be. He couldn't have said that. Yes, Eloise, and he did. At the other end of the line, there was a muffled murmur of voices. The ceremony had apparently ended and the guests were moving into the banquet hall. That's terrible, Grandma. I'll talk to him. Make him apologize. He had no right to. Don't, sweetheart, I interrupted her gently. Don't spoil your party. Have fun, dance. Enjoy the moment. What party? There were tears in her voice. How can I have fun when I know you've been treated like this? It's not fair. There's a lot of unfair things in life, dear. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Grandmother. Eloise suddenly spoke more softly, almost in a whisper. Something strange is going on here. The hotel manager is arguing with Papa and Paulina about something. They seem very upset. I didn't answer. So Richard's already taken action and the payments are blocked, or Carrie has broken the news to the organizers. Either way, the repercussions of my decision have already begun to show. Grandma, are you here? Eloise asked worriedly. Yes, sweetie. Listen, whatever happens tonight, remember, I love you and nothing is going to change that. You're scaring me, she laughed nervously. You sound like you're saying goodbye. No, of course not, I reassured her. I just want you to know that you can always count on me. Always. I know, Grandma, I love you too. There were voices on the phone calling for Eloise. I have to go, she said quickly. I think some problems with the banquet are starting. I'll call you back later, okay? Of course, darling. Go. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. It's done. There's no turning back. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done the right thing. For the first time in years, I stopped being an invisible ATM for my son and started respecting myself. The phone rang again. This time, Lion's name came up. I stared at the screen, watching the phone vibrate on the desk. One ring, a second, a third. Then silence. After a minute, a message came through. Mom, we need to talk urgently. Call me back. I put the phone screen down. I had no desire to talk to my son, at least not today. Let him realize what he'd done first. Let him feel at least some of the pain he'd caused me. I got up from the chair and went to the window. The sun was beginning to set, coloring the sky orange and pink. Strangely, for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. It was like I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying around for decades. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Eloise nervously rubbed the bracelet on her wrist, watching what was happening. What had started out as her father's perfect wedding was turning into a disaster before her eyes. The banquet hall of the Belvedere Hotel was magnificent. Snow-white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, exquisite floral arrangements on every table. But the party atmosphere had evaporated, giving way to tension and confusion. In a corner of the room, her father, Lion Thorndyke, was arguing vehemently with the hotel manager, a short, overweight man in an austere suit. Paulina, his newlywed wife, stood nearby, her perfect makeup unable to hide the expression of panic on her face. There must be some misunderstanding, Eloise heard her father say. The payments were confirmed a week ago. The hotel manager shook his head. Mr. Thorndyke, I just received a notice from our finance department. The payment has been withdrawn. We can't provide services without payment. But that's absurd. Paulina's parents? Eloise frowned. Paulina's parents? Hadn't her father paid for the wedding? She had always assumed that Lion had insisted on taking care of all the expenses. He often bragged about his financial independence and his success in the insurance business. Her musings were interrupted by Paulina's loud voice. Check again. There's some kind of mistake. The guests have already gathered. We can't cancel the banquet. Eloise looked around. Indeed, about 120 guests had already gathered in the hall. Many of them were sitting at tables, looking at each other in bewilderment. Others stood in groups, talking quietly and casting curious glances in the direction of the arguing. Paulina's parents, an elegant couple in their 60s, separated from their group and walked toward their daughter. What's going on? Paulina's father, Jeffrey Redgrave, a tall, gray-haired man with a commanding face, asked. Why isn't champagne being served? Paulina turned to him with an expression of despair. Dad, there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the payment. They say the payments have been withdrawn. Withdrawn? Jeffrey frowned. What payments? Eloise saw Lion and Paulina exchange quick glances. At that moment, a woman entered the hall with a clipboard in hand, her name tag identifying her as a representative of a wedding agency. Mr. and Mrs. Thorndyke, she addressed the newlyweds. I need to speak to you urgently. They stepped aside, forming a small circle. Eloise, on a sudden impulse, stealthily moved closer to hear the conversation. All payments have been withdrawn by the main sponsor, the woman from the agency was saying. We've tried to contact the bank, but the decision is final. The main sponsor? Lion interjected. What are you talking about? Who's the main sponsor? The woman looked confused. Your mother, Mr. Thorndyke, Leslie Thorndyke. She paid for most of the wedding expenses. Eloise barely held back a sigh of surprise. Grandmother? Grandmother was the one who had financed all this luxury. Lion's face turned pale, then instantly reddened with anger. What kind of nonsense is this? My mother didn't pay for anything. It was all Paulina's parents. Jeffrey Redgrave, hearing his name, came closer. What are you talking about, Lion? Margaret and I only paid for the pre-wedding dinner. You said you were taking care of the main expenses. Paulina was now pale. She looked at her husband with wide-open eyes. Lion? What are they talking about? Eloise saw her father swallow, his caddy twitching. He frantically pulled out his cell phone and began dialing, stepping away from the group. Eloise was sure he was calling her grandmother. She took advantage of the moment of general confusion and slipped through the glass doors onto the hotel terrace. She needed to call her grandmother immediately. Taking out her cell phone, she dialed a familiar number. Grandma? She asked when Leslie answered. We're having a total nightmare here. What's going on? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Grandma sighed softly. I guess they found out I canceled the payments. So it's true? Eloise lowered her voice, even though there was no one on the terrace. You paid for Papa's wedding, but why in secret? Your father wouldn't accept help from me directly, my dear. You know how complicated our relationship is. He wanted to throw a lavish wedding for Paulina, but he couldn't really afford it. Eloise leaned against the railing of the terrace. The evening air was warm, and somewhere in the distance the sun was setting, coloring the sky pink and gold. Such a beautiful evening for such a terrible event. But why did you cancel the payments? She asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. Because your father kicked me out of my own wedding, Leslie replied simply. Said I wasn't invited, that I didn't fit into their elite event. Eloise closed her eyes. She loved her father, but sometimes his snobbery and desire to appear better than he was crossed all boundaries. That's terrible, grandmother. Forgive him, please. It's not about forgiveness, Eloise. It's about respect. I've supported your father for years, given him money when he needed it. And all I asked for in return was a little attention and gratitude. But for him, I was never good enough, not educated enough, not refined enough. Eloise heard a noise behind her and turned around. Through the glass doors, she could see chaos unfolding in the banquet hall. Employees in flower company uniforms were taking arrangements off the tables and packing them into boxes. Waiters were removing glasses and cutlery. The guests looked at each other perplexedly. Some of them were already starting to pack up to leave. Grandmother, the place is falling apart, Eloise said, returning to the conversation. The flowers are being taken away. The catering is packing up the food. It's a nightmare. I'm sorry you have to witness this, dear. Leslie's voice sounded genuinely regretful. You don't deserve to be dragged into this situation. It's not about me. Eloise shook her head, though her grandmother couldn't see it. It's so humiliating for Papa and Paulina. All the guests see their perfect wedding falling apart. Sometimes lessons are hard, Leslie said quietly, but they are necessary. Again, a noise caught Eloise's attention. Through the glass, she saw her father, red with anger, arguing furiously with the catering manager. Paulina beside him looked like she was about to cry. Her carefully styled hair was beginning to disintegrate, her makeup smudged. Daddy's furious, Eloise reported. He's yelling at everyone, and Paulina looks like she's going to burst into tears. Your father has always been bad at dealing with difficulties, Leslie sighed. When things don't go according to his plan, he loses his temper. At that moment, Eloise noticed Lion pulling out his phone again and poking furiously at the screen. A second later, Leslie's phone rang. "It's Daddy calling you," Eloise said. "I can see that," Grandma answered. "It's the fifth time in the last half hour. I won't answer it. He won't calm down until he talks to you. Let him cool down first. It won't do any good to talk to him like this." Eloise went back into the hall. The situation was getting worse before our eyes. The hotel manager was now demanding that the guests leave the room if the bill wasn't paid within 30 minutes. Paulina's parents looked shocked and embarrassed. Jeffrey Redgrave was hotly arguing something to Lion, poking his finger at his chest. "Grandma, Paulina's parents are fighting with Daddy now," Eloise said into the phone. "Apparently, he told them he was paying for everything himself, and they didn't even know you were co-financing. Your father never missed an opportunity to look more successful than he really was." Leslie's voice was bitter. "He always wanted to impress the right people." Eloise moved closer to the arguing, trying to remain inconspicuous. "You swore you'd take care of all the expenses," Jeffrey said angrily. "You said your business was booming, and now it turns out that all this time your mother was secretly paying for your wedding? A mother you didn't even invite?" "That's not true," Lion defended himself. "I had no idea she had interfered. This is some kind of misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jeffrey snorted contemptuously. "The only misunderstanding here is that my daughter married a man like you." Paulina, who was standing nearby, burst into tears finally. "Papa, please don't," she sobbed. "Not here, not in front of everyone." But it was too late. The guests did not hide their interest in the unfolding drama. Someone even filmed what was happening on his cell phone. Eloise imagined with horror that the videos would spread on social networks. "Grandma, it's terrible," she whispered into the phone. "Everything's falling apart." Jeffrey called Daddy a liar in front of all the guests. "I'm sorry about that," Leslie replied, and Eloise could hear the genuine regret in her voice. "But your father made his choice when he decided that his mother wasn't good enough for his new life." At that moment, the hotel manager clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, "due to unforeseen circumstances, the event is canceled. Please leave the room within 15 minutes. A murmur of voices rang through the room. Guests began to gather, many approaching the newlyweds, expressing bewilderment and sympathy. Eloise saw Paulina, covering her face with her hands, run out of the hall, accompanied by her mother. Lion stood in the midst of all this chaos, confused and humiliated. "They've canceled the banquet," Eloise informed her grandmother. "They're asking everyone to leave." "I understand," Leslie replied quietly. "You go too, dear. You shouldn't stay there." "What about Daddy? I can't just leave him in this situation." "You're a good daughter, Eloise. More kind than he deserves. But sometimes people have to deal with the consequences of their actions on their own." Eloise hesitated. She was torn by conflicting feelings. On the one hand, she understood her grandmother. The way Lion had treated her today was unforgivable. On the other hand, he was her father after all, and seeing him so broken was painful. At that moment, Lion noticed her and headed in her direction. His face was contorted with anger. "Are you talking to her?" he asked, pointing at the phone in her hand. "Let me talk to her." Eloise instinctively took a step back. "Dad, now is not the time. Give me the phone," he almost shouted, holding out his hand. "Grandma, Daddy wants to talk to you," Eloise said quickly into the receiver. "He is very angry." "I hear you," Leslie replied. "Don't give him the phone if you don't want to, but if he insists, I'm ready to talk to him." Lion snatched the phone out of his daughter's hands before she could make up her mind. "Mom!" he shouted into the receiver. "What the hell have you done? Do you realize you've ruined my wedding?" Eloise couldn't hear what her grandmother was answering, but she saw her father's face change from fury to shock, then back to anger. "How could you?" His voice shook. "How could you humiliate me like that in front of everyone? In front of Paulina's parents, in front of our friends?" A pause. Then, "This is completely different. Yes, I left you off the guest list, but that's no reason to sabotage me like that. You did it out of revenge, admit it." Another pause, longer than the previous one. Lion's face grew progressively paler. "No, you don't understand. I can't just pay you now. I don't have that kind of money in cash. And the bank isn't open tonight. Eloise saw her father listening, his shoulders gradually slumping as if air was being let out of him. Please, Mom. There was a plea in his voice now. Give the payments back. We can discuss our differences later. Right now, my reputation, my marriage, everything is at stake. He listened for a while longer, then his face contorted with rage. He shouted something harsh and threw the phone at Eloise. She barely caught it in time. Grandma? She asked cautiously, bringing the phone to her ear. Are you there? Yes, dear. Leslie's voice was tired but calm. I'm afraid I couldn't help your father. He's furious. Eloise watched Lion gesticulate furiously as he spoke to the hotel manager. I've never seen him like this. He's always had a temper, Leslie sighed. Even as a kid. Whenever something didn't go according to his plan, he'd throw tantrums. Lion took out his cell phone again and started calling someone. Judging by his gestures and facial expression, the conversation was tense. I think he's trying to find money, Eloise said. He's calling people he knows, I guess. That won't help, Leslie replied. It would take a lot of money to cover all the expenses. Your father doesn't have any friends who are wealthy enough to lend him $80,000 without preparation. Eloise ahead. $80,000? That's what the wedding cost? Your father and Paulina wanted to impress the bride's parents and their high-ranking friends. That kind of impression costs a lot. The hall is almost empty. Most of the guests had already left. The hotel staff was putting away the last of the decorations and dishes. Paulina returned to the hall accompanied by her parents. Her eyes were red from crying, her makeup completely ruined. She furiously reprimanded Lion, who looked completely lost. It looks like their marriage won't last, Eloise said sadly. Paulina is furious. Her parents are too. If their relationship doesn't survive the first test, then it wasn't as strong as it seemed, Leslie said philosophically. The hotel manager approached Lion and said something to him, pointing to his watch. Lion nodded, his shoulders slumping finally. We need to leave, Eloise said. The manager is no longer asking, but demanding. Where are you staying? Leslie asked. Do you have a place to stay? Yes, I have a room in the same hotel. There's supposed to be a family brunch tomorrow. Oh, good. Okay, stay there. Don't go back to your dad's tonight. He needs time to cool down. Eloise nodded, though Grandma couldn't see it. All right, Grandmother. I'll do that. And Eloise. Yes? I love you, darling. Whatever happened between me and your father has no effect on my feelings for you. Eloise felt a lump in her throat. I love you too, Grandma. I understand why you did what you did. I really do. They said goodbye, and Eloise put her phone in her purse. The auditorium was almost empty. Lion was standing by the exit, frantically typing something on his phone. Paulina and her parents had already left. The wedding, which was supposed to be the beginning of a happy new life, was over before it could begin. Eloise walked over to her father. Papa, she said softly, let's get out of here. He raised his eyes to her, and she was struck by the despair in his gaze. She ruined everything, he said hoarsely. Out of revenge. Pure revenge. Eloise shook her head. No, Papa. You ruined everything yourself when you kicked your own mother out of the wedding. She turned and walked toward the exit, leaving my father alone in the empty banquet hall, amidst the remnants of the failed party. I woke up to a loud banging on the door. At first I thought it was part of the dream, but it came again, insistent, angry. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was only 7 a.m. Who could have come so early? The knocking turned to a drumbeat, and I heard Lion's voice. Mom! Open up right now! I know you're home! I slowly got out of bed. After yesterday's events, I felt strangely calm. No fear, no regret. Just a quiet confidence that I had done the right thing. Putting on my robe, I headed for the front door. Lion kept pounding the door so hard that it looked like it was about to fly off its hinges. The neighbors must be awake from the noise by now. Well, let them hear what kind of son I have. I opened the door and looked at Lion in silence. He looked awful. A wrinkled suit, mussed hair, red eyes, like he'd been up all night. He probably had. You! He jabbed his finger at me, pushing his way into the house. You ruined my life! I closed the door quietly and turned to him. Good morning, Lion, I said in an even voice. You're early. Don't you dare, he almost shouted. Don't you dare stand there and pretend like nothing happened. I walked past him into the kitchen. I needed a coffee before this conversation. I remember exactly what happened, I said, filling the kettle with water. You asked me to leave your wedding, and I canceled the payments I was making for your celebration. You planned the whole thing. Lion followed me around. You secretly paid for all this on purpose so you could get revenge. You knew I didn't want you at the wedding. I put the kettle on the stove and turned to my son. No, Lion. When I arranged with the agency 2 months ago, I had no idea you wouldn't invite me. What kind of mother would assume such a thing? He was silent for a moment, but quickly found himself. You should have said you were paying. It's manipulative to go behind my back. Would you have accepted my money if I had offered it directly? Lion averted his eyes. That's a different question. The point is that you ruined my wedding, humiliated me in front of all the guests, in front of Paulina's parents. The kettle whistled. I calmly took it off the fire and started making coffee. Do you want some? I asked him. No! He slammed his fist on the table. I didn't come for coffee. I want to know why you did this to me. I sat down at the table with a cup in my hands and looked at my son carefully. Why did I do that? Why did you kick me out of your own wedding? Why did you say I wasn't invited? Why were you ashamed of me in front of your elite guests? I wasn't ashamed, he mumbled unconvincingly. It's just that the wedding was planned for a certain circle. A circle your mother doesn't fit into, I finished for him. Because I'm a simple woman who's worked with her hands all her life. Because I don't have a university education or high society connections. Because I embarrass you with my background. Lion looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just waved his hand. It doesn't matter. What's done is done, but you have to make it right. Fix it? I raised my eyebrows. Fix it how? Return the payments, he blurted out. Call the bank, the agency, all the suppliers. Tell them it was a mistake. I sipped my coffee, feeling its bitterness on my tongue. It's late, Lion. The money has been returned to my account. I already received confirmation from the bank last night. Then make new payments. He started pacing around the kitchen. Paulina is hysterical. Her parents are threatening to cut all ties with us. We had to spend the night in a cheap motel because the hotel refused to give us a room. I watched him, remembering the little boy who used to thrash around the room like that when he didn't get the toy he wanted. It's been so many years and nothing has changed. Where were you planning to spend your honeymoon? I asked. Lion stopped and looked at me suspiciously. What's that got to do with it? Italy, 2 weeks. The flight leaves tomorrow. It was supposed to be tomorrow. And who paid for the trip? He frowned. Me, of course. Paulina and I paid for it ourselves. No, I shook my head. I paid for that too, through the same agency. It was all included in the total. Lion froze, his face changing. He sank slowly into the chair across from me. What do you mean? His voice sounded quieter. What's the total amount? I sighed. $86,400. That's what your wedding and honeymoon in Italy cost, Lion. And it was all paid for by me. He stared at me, his eyes widening. It's impossible. You couldn't. Where did you get that kind of money? I sold the business 5 years ago, remember? For $2,300,000. I invested most of it, living off the interest. I can afford to spend some of it on my only son's wedding. Lion sat there stunned by this information. I could see his mind reassessing the situation. His mother, whom he thought was just an old lady with a small pension, turned out to be a wealthy woman, able to pay for a lavish wedding and a vacation in Italy. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Why did you hide the fact that you had money? I wasn't hiding it, I answered calmly. You never asked. You were only interested in the amount of money you could get from me. Remember that startup of your buddies? You wanted me to invest $200,000 without explaining exactly what it was about. It was a promising project, he defended himself. We could have tripled our investment. Or we could have lost it all. I chose more reliable options. And as you can see, I didn't fail. Lion looked confused. His anger was slowly giving way to confusion and, surprisingly, some respect. He was looking at me with new eyes, as if for the first time he was seeing me not just as a mother, but as an independent, successful woman. This moment of enlightenment did not last long. Within a minute, his face took on the calculating expression I knew so well. He leaned across the table toward me. "Mom," his voice became soft, almost affectionate. "I understand that you were offended, and you had a right to be. I was wrong not to invite you. It was a mistake." I waited silently for him to continue. It was a tactic I knew well, too. First admit fault, then move on to the request. "But you don't want my marriage to start with such a scandal, do you?" he continued. "Think of Paulina. It's not her fault. And about Paulina's parents. They are influential people. They can help me and you in the future." "How could they help an old woman like me?" I asked with a touch of irony. Lion didn't see the catch. "Jeffrey has connections in all areas. If you need a good doctor, a place in the best nursing home." I couldn't help but laugh. "Nursing home? Really, Lion? I'm 67 in good health and with enough capital to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Why would I need a nursing home?" He was embarrassed but quickly regrouped. "I was just giving an example. The point is, we'd all be better off if you rectified the situation. Pay the money back and we can have the wedding dinner all over again, with you in attendance. I'll personally invite you, put you in the place of honor." I set down my empty cup and shook my head. "No, Lion, the money won't come back for the wedding." His face changed instantly. The mask of benevolence fell away, giving way to anger. "What do you mean, no? You can't just say no. This is my marriage, my reputation on the line." "I've already handled the money," I said calmly. "It will go to Eloise's education." Lion froze. "What?" "Last night I opened a trust fund in Eloise's name. $80,000 will be available to pay for her education, college, master's, maybe a doctorate. She's 22, she's got her whole life ahead of her." "You can't do that!" He was outraged. "That money was meant for my wedding." "It was for your happiness," I corrected him. "But you made it clear that your happiness didn't include me, so I found a better use for it." Lion jumped up from his chair, his face red with anger. "You're doing this out of spite! Out of revenge! You want to ruin my life!" I stood up too, looking my son straight in the eye. "No, Lion. I'm doing this because for the first time in years, I've decided to respect myself. For years, I've tolerated your neglect, your shame for me, your constant requests for money without a word of thanks. I let you use me, hoping that one day you would see me not only as a source of financial support, but as a mother who loved you and deserved respect." I paused, feeling tears coming to my throat but held them back. "But you crossed the line yesterday. Kicking your own mother out of a wedding isn't just disrespectful, it's cruel, and I won't stand for it anymore." Lion stood, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. "You're going to regret this," he said through gritted teeth. "I swear you will." "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is the years I spent letting you manipulate me. But that's over." You, he gasped with rage, unable to find the words. "What am I going to tell Paulina? Her parents? They're waiting for an explanation." "Tell them the truth," I shrugged. "That you kicked your mother out of the wedding and she withdrew her financial support. Or make something up, you were always inventive with excuses." Lion grabbed a cup off the table and threw it to the floor with force. The porcelain shattered, coffee grounds flying across the kitchen linoleum. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll find a way to make you pay for this. And the money for Eloise's education, I'll contest that trust. She's my daughter. I have a right to—" "You can try," I said calmly. "But the trust is legally impeccable. My lawyer made sure of that. The money belongs to Eloise, and neither you nor I can take it." His face contorted with impotent rage. He turned around and headed for the exit, sweeping everything he could get his hands on off the countertop: salt shaker, sugar bowl, vase of fake flowers. "I don't want to see you anymore," he shouted, turning around in the doorway. "You are not my mother. You've never been a real mother to me." Those words should have hurt me, but strangely I felt only relief. It was as if the last thread tying me to a toxic relationship had finally broken. "Goodbye, Lion," I said quietly. He slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. I heard him start the car and drive off with a squeal of tires. I sank down in my chair, looking at the shards of the cup on the floor. Symbolic. Our relationship was shattered too, and it was impossible to put it back together again. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, I was doing what I thought was right, not adjusting to my son's expectations, not sacrificing my dignity for his whims. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my musings. Eloise's name popped up on the screen. I sighed and answered it. Grandma? My granddaughter's voice sounded worried. Are you okay? Daddy just called me. He was furious. I'm fine, dear, I answered. Your father came by, we talked. He's upset, but he'll get over it. He said that you gave the money from the wedding to me? For your education? Is that true? I smiled. Yes, it's true. I've set up a trust fund in your name. The money will be available to pay for tuition, college, graduate school, whatever you want. But Grandma, Eloise sounded shocked. That's a huge amount of money. I can't. You can, I interrupted her gently. And it's the best investment I could make. You're a smart, talented girl. Use that money to get an education, to build a career, to become independent. I don't know what to say. I could hear tears in her voice. Thank you. But I'm afraid that Daddy will stop talking to you altogether now. It's his choice, I sighed. I'll always be ready to reconcile if he truly wants me to. But I won't take any more disrespect and neglect. I understand, Eloise said quietly. I'm on your side, grandmother. What he did at the wedding was awful. We talked some more. Eloise revealed that Paulina and her parents had left early that morning, leaving Lion alone at the motel. It seems that not only did the wedding not take place, but the marriage itself was in jeopardy. After talking to my granddaughter, I set about cleaning up the cup shards and the mess Lion had made. As I swept the floor, I pondered the future. Perhaps it was time for a change. Wilmington held too many painful memories. Maybe it was worth moving somewhere else, starting a new chapter of life. After I finished cleaning, I sat down at my computer and opened up a real estate listing website, just to look, to explore the options. Nothing specific, just thoughts on possibilities. The phone rang again. This time it was Richard from the bank. Mrs. Thorndyke, I'm calling to let you know that the trust fund in Eloise Thorndyke's name has been successfully executed. All the paperwork's in. The money's been transferred. You'll need to stop by the branch to sign some papers. Thank you, Richard. I'll stop by this afternoon. And, he continued, your son called the bank, trying to find out the details of the trust, saying it was some kind of mistake. I sighed. There's no mistake, Richard. The trust was set up on my initiative and is entirely in accordance with my wishes. That's what I told him, Mrs. Thorndyke, but he was persistent. He threatened legal action. Let him threaten, I replied calmly. He has no grounds to challenge my disposition of my own funds. We finished talking, and I went back to looking at real estate listings. Now I was looking not only at houses in other cities, but also at cruise tours. All my life I'd dreamed of seeing the world, but I'd put that dream off. First for my family, then for my business, then for Lion and his needs. It was time to start living for myself. And for the first time in years, the thought didn't make me feel guilty. Sunlight poured in on the terrace of my new house in Savannah, Georgia. I sat in a wicker chair, sipping iced lemonade and watching the magnolias sway in the breeze. It had been 4 months since the day my life had been turned upside down, the day of Lion's failed wedding. Those months have flown by in hassles and decisions that should have been made long ago. The sale of the house in Wilmington was surprisingly quick. It went in 3 days at an above-market price. It was as if fate itself was pushing me to make a change. The search for a new home took a little longer, but when I saw this small but cozy one-story house with a terrace and a garden in a quiet neighborhood in Savannah, I immediately knew, this is what I need. Moving at 67 would seem crazy to many people. My neighbors in Wilmington shook their heads and said that in my old age, it was better to stay where everything was familiar. But I felt that it was now, with most of my life behind me, that I needed a change. I needed new air, new faces, new opportunities. I spent my first weeks in Savannah organizing my home. I bought furniture, curtains, dishes, everything new, nothing from my old life. It was like starting from scratch. Then I began to explore the city, its parks, museums, restaurants, stores. I signed up for watercolor classes at the local community center. As a young girl, I loved to paint, but gave it up when I started to develop my business. Now, decades later, the brush was back in my hand, like an old friend to catch up with. My phone vibrated. There was a text from Eloise. She'd sent a picture of her student project, some kind of elaborate architectural model. The caption beneath the photo read, "Got the highest grade. Thanks for the opportunity to attend graduate school, Grandma." I smiled. After the wedding story, Eloise had transferred to a master's program in architecture, fulfilling a long-time dream she had previously considered unfulfilled due to the high cost of tuition. Now, thanks to the trust I set up for her, she could concentrate fully on her studies without worrying about finances. Eloise was the only person from my previous life with whom I kept in regular contact. We called every 2 or 3 days, exchanged messages, and last month she even flew to visit me for the weekend. We walked around historic downtown Savannah, drank coffee in cozy cafes, and discussed her studies and my new life. At some point, the conversation inevitably touched on Lion. "Dad's still mad," Eloise said then, looking into her cup. "He doesn't talk about you, but when I mention your name, his face stiffens." I nodded. That was to be expected. Lion had never been good at forgiveness. Even as a child, he could sulk for weeks over the slightest offense. "What about his relationship with Paulina?" I asked. "Did they get married after all?" Eloise wrinkled her nose. "Yes, if you could call it a wedding. It was pathetic." She told me what happened after the first ceremony failed. Paulina was furious. Her parents demanded that the engagement be broken off. But Lion somehow convinced them to give him another chance. Promised to organize a new wedding. Modest, but worthy. The ceremony took place 3 weeks after the first attempt. Instead of a luxurious Hotel Belvedere, a small restaurant on the outskirts of Wilmington. Instead of 100 guests, just 30 of their closest friends and family. Instead of live music and dancing until morning, a DJ with a laptop for 2 hours. Instead of Italy as a honeymoon, a weekend at the nearest resort. "It was so embarrassing," Eloise recalled. All the guests knew about the fiasco of the first wedding. Everyone was whispering. Paulina's parents were sitting with such faces as if they were attending a funeral, not a wedding. Paulina herself was smiling forcefully, and Dad looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. I could imagine the picture. Lion, who had spent his life trying to impress others, must have felt humiliated. "You know what's ironic?" Eloise continued. "In his speech, Dad thanked Paulina's parents for their financial support. Lied right in front of everyone as if they had paid for the first wedding, not you." I shook my head. Typical Lion. He'd rather lie than admit a truth that made him look bad. "And Paulina? How does she feel about your father now?" "I don't know," Eloise shrugged. "They stay together, but something has changed between them. Paulina is always pointing out his faults to Daddy as if he owes her something. And he's gotten kind of shy, lost his usual self-confidence." She sounded sympathetic, and I knew it. For all his faults, Lion was still her father. Eloise loved him, even though she saw his weaknesses. "Did he ask about you?" I asked. "No," Eloise shook her head. "But he knows we communicate. Sometimes when I'm on the phone with you and he's nearby, I notice him listening. I think deep down he misses you, Grandma. It's just that his pride won't let him admit it." I didn't comment on that assumption. There were enough illusions in our family, and I didn't want to create new ones. If Lion really missed me, he knew how to contact me. My phone number hadn't changed. Memories of that conversation with Eloise slowly melted away, and I returned to the present moment, to my terrace in Savannah, where the sun was already beginning to sink. I finished my lemonade and returned to the house. There were papers on the table that demanded my attention. The cruise company brochures, the booking confirmation, the list of things I needed. In 3 days, I was going on a Caribbean cruise, a 2-week trip on a luxury liner with stops on several islands. A dream I had cherished for decades was finally becoming a reality. When I was young, Derek and I had often talked about such a trip. Someday, when the business is stable, when Lion grows up. But Derek died without ever seeing Caribbean beaches, and I kept putting off this dream. First because of work, then because of obligations to my son. Now, I was finally doing it for me. The trip was expensive, but I could afford it. After selling my house in Wilmington and buying a new home in Savannah, I had a substantial amount left over. In addition, my investments continued to generate a steady income. I could afford small luxuries without worrying about the future. Of course, there were moments of doubt. A voice in my head, suspiciously similar to Lion's, asked, "What if you get sick? Who will take care of you in a foreign city? Wouldn't it be better to save your money for a rainy day?" But I've learned to silence that voice. Life is too short to put happiness on hold all the time. My new financial advisor, a young woman named Tamara, fully supported me in this. "Mrs. Thorndyke," she said at our first meeting, "with your capital and a sensible approach to spending, you can afford to live life to the fullest and still maintain a financial safety cushion. You've worked hard to build that wealth. Now it's time to enjoy the fruits of your labor." I laid out on the table the items I planned to take with me on the cruise: a swimsuit, the first time I'd bought a new one in years, sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, a camera. Next to it was a book of Spanish. I'd started learning it 2 weeks ago so I could communicate at least a little with the locals on the islands. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Marta, my new friend from the watercolor group. We'd arranged to have dinner together before I left. "Leslie, are you ready? I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. "Yes, Martha, I'm ready. I'm waiting for you." I went to change. I took out of my closet a light floral dress, another recent purchase. I wouldn't have dared wear something so bright and youthful in Wilmington. I'd be afraid of the neighbors' leering stares, of Lion's ironic comments. But here in Savannah, I was free of those fears. No one knew me as Lion's mother or the Thorndyke widow who keeps the laundries. I was simply Leslie, a new resident in town taking painting lessons and learning Spanish. Martha arrived exactly at the appointed time. An energetic 60-year-old woman with a short haircut and an infectious laugh, she was the complete opposite of my former friends from Wilmington. Divorced, without children, she had traveled halfway around the world and worked as a freelance photographer. "Oh, what a lovely dress!" she exclaimed when I opened the door. "It looks great on you. You'll make a splash in the Caribbean." We went to a small seafood restaurant near my house. At dinner, Martha asked me about the upcoming cruise and gave me advice. She had been to some of the islands on my itinerary. "Be sure to try the local rum in Jamaica," she said. "And don't be afraid to haggle in the markets. It's part of the local culture." I listened to her with a smile, making mental notes. It was one of those moments when I felt the contrast between my past and present life particularly keenly. Before, such a conversation would have seemed fantastic to me. Me, Leslie Thorndyke, haggling in a Jamaican market. Unthinkable. Now it was a very real possibility. "What about your son?" Martha suddenly asked. "Is he still out of touch?" I sighed. Martha knew the history of my conflict with Leon, not all the details, but the general outline. "No, he hasn't, and I don't expect that to change." "His loss," Martha shrugged. "You know, my mother always said, 'Children are raised for the world, not for themselves.' Your son is living his life, and you have every right to live yours." I nodded, feeling grateful for those words. It was the kind of support I'd missed before, practical, unsentimental, recognizing reality for what it was. After dinner, Martha and I took a walk through evening Savannah. The city was beautiful at dusk. Old houses with balconies, squares with fountains, trees covered with Spanish moss. We reached the Savannah riverfront where the tourist ships were docked. "In 3 days, I'll be on a much bigger ship," I said, looking at the riverboats. "And that will be just the beginning," Martha said with a wink. "After the Caribbean, there's the Mediterranean, Alaska, Scandinavia. Don't get ahead of yourself," I laughed. "Let me handle this cruise first." We said goodbye outside my house. Martha hugged me and promised to drop me at the airport on the day of departure. "And bring me back a magnet from Barbados," she shouted as she got into the car. "I already have a collection." Back home, I checked the list of things for the cruise one more time. Everything was ready. I sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the night garden lit by a street lamp. My thoughts went back to Lion. I'd last heard from Eloise 2 weeks ago. According to her, he'd taken a new job, still in the same insurance field, but with a smaller company and a lower salary. Paulina wasn't happy, thought it was a step backwards in his career. But Lion himself seemed to accept it. "He's gotten quieter," Eloise said. "Less boastful, more realistic. Perhaps the lessons of the failed wedding hadn't gone to waste. Perhaps Lion had finally begun to realize that ostentatious luxury and the desire to impress were not the most important things in life. Or maybe it was just my maternal illusions, wanting to believe that my son had the potential for growth and change. Either way, I made the decision to no longer let his problems and his attitude toward me define my life. For too many years, I had lived with an eye on his opinions, his needs, his whims. That chapter was closed. I reached over to the nightstand and pulled out the photo album, the only thing I'd brought from my old home besides my clothes and some personal papers. I flipped through to a picture taken 35 years ago, me, Derek, and little Lion on the beach. We were all smiling, happy and carefree. "I hope you'd approve, Derek," I whispered, running my finger over my husband's face in the picture. "I hope you'd say I deserve this new life." I closed the album and returned it to its place. Tomorrow was the last day of preparations for the trip. I had to pick up the currency from the bank, check all the documents once again, and finish packing my suitcases. And in 3 days, I would be standing on the deck of a huge cruise liner, watching the coastline disappear in the distance and a vast ocean of possibilities open up in front of me. This is how I imagine my new life, without the weight of past offenses, without the weight of unjustified expectations, without the need to constantly prove my worth. Just a life filled with new impressions, new acquaintances, new discoveries, my own life, which I had been putting off for so long, but which had finally begun. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the terrace. The Savannah night sky was studded with stars. A light breeze brought the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. I inhaled deeply, feeling the calm and reassurance flooding through me. "Thank you," I whispered to someone I didn't know, maybe to fate, maybe to myself. "Thank you for this second chance." At 67, I was finally living the life I'd always wanted, and there was so much more to see, to feel, to know. A new life was just beginning.